I firstly want to pay tribute to the media who first blew the whistle on this matter. Investigative journalism in South Africa is an asset to our country and holds us in public office, as well as those in public entities, accountable for the work that we undertake. But today, it is also important for the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure and its key implementing agent, the Independent Development Trust, as we hold ourselves accountable to the public for whom we serve. When I took office as the Minister of the Department just over a year ago, I made it clear to the Department internally and to our entities and to the country at large that we would draw a very hard line in the sand when it came to poor administration and allegations of corruption. I said that we would restore public trust in this department and every institution that reports to it by ensuring that they run an organization that is professional, transparent, and for the benefit of the public, and not just for the few. From the moment I stepped into this role, I was already aware of the long-standing and serious allegations of maladministration, financial misconduct, and corruption at the IDT. Those concerns have haunted the IDT for a number of years. Incomplete projects, tender irregularities, and consistent audit disclaimers have tarnished the entity's credibility and shaken confidence across government and civil society for whom they serve. So when in October last year, the Daily Maverick published alarming exposés into the 800 million rand PSA Oxygen Plant tender, we had to act and get to the bottom of it. On the 28th of October 2024, the Daily Maverick published an investigative piece claiming that one of the companies awarded received a contract over 400 million rand, lacked SAPRA medical product registration, submitted questionable documents, and appeared to be a ghost entity, one without verifiable contact details, premises, or capacity. Another joint venture, also awarded a sizable portion of the tender, was said to have a checkered history with public contracts. This tender was intended to deliver life-saving pressure swing adsorption oxygen plants to 60 hospitals across the country. It was a project worth 836 million rand, of which 528 million rand had been allocated directly to the IDT. The delivery of these plants was not just a procurement exercise, it was a national health priority. On learning of these claims, I immediately demanded answers from the IDT Board at the time. On the 29th of October 2024, I requested full documentation from the IDT, including the contracts, evaluation committee minutes, SAPRA certificates, and due diligence reports. What I received at the time was inadequate and incomplete. And a backwards and forwards exchange of letters ensued, initially with the IDT denying that there were then problems with the tender. On the 1st of November 2024, I called for the board to consider suspending the tender, which they initially did not support. And then finally in December of 2024, they admitted that there may have been a problem with the tender. By the 5th of December, the Department of Health officially announced its intention to withdraw the PSA project from the IDT and reassign it to the Development Bank of Southern Africa. At this point, the IDT was now also in a governance crisis. Its board had been inchoate for a number of months. It was operating with 7 trustees short of the 8 required to legally function. There was no standing audit and risk committee and no internal audit capability worth noting. I was also clear that an entity in this state could not credibly investigate itself, despite insistences from the IDT at the time that they would investigate this matter. Considering the above, I was therefore left with no choice but to act and institute an independent investigation into the matter. On the 15th of January 2025, the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure appointed an independent advisory firm to conduct a full independent forensic investigation into the PSA Oxygen Plant tender. Their terms of reference were broad, and to investigate whether fraud, corruption, maladministration, or regulatory non-compliance had occurred and whether internal audits and controls had failed. Over the next 6 months, the investigators conducted over 40 interviews with departmental officials, IDT executives, contractors, and oversight stakeholders. They reviewed more than 90 procurement documents, analyzed financial records, and conducted CIPC, CIDB, and SAPRA verifications. But even as the investigation got underway, a disturbing counter-campaign was launched. From early February onwards, I became the target of a coordinated disinformation attack. Fabricated call logs were published, AI-generated voice notes were circulated online, anonymous whistleblowers released baseless allegations against me and my office. Fake news articles were published, with one major media house having to later withdraw that because the claims could not be substantiated. This campaign against me and my team was amplified by political parties, including the EFF and Action South Africa, who filed bogus complaints against me and claimed that I was interfering in tender processes. Every time we act against wrongdoing in the department, there is a chorus of voices to defend that wrongdoing and maintain the status quo. We have to ask ourselves why and at whose behest do they work for. It is deeply concerning that we seem to have learned very little from the modus operandi of state capture. What I did do, and what I will continue to do, is to demand accountability. I did not take an oath of office to protect wrongdoing. I took an oath of office to protect the Constitution and the people of South Africa, and I will not apologize for that, not today or not ever. Despite these attacks, the investigation was completed and a report issued to the department. It is my intention to brief you on these findings. I would therefore now like to quote directly from a section of the forensic report which lays bare the depth of the procedural failings and regulatory breaches uncovered during the investigation, and I quote, "The National Department of Health and the Independent Development Trust entered into a memorandum of understanding which was signed by the Department of Health and the IDT on the 20th of June 2022 and the 24th of June 2022 respectively for various projects to be undertaken by the IDT as the implementing agent. This included the PSA Oxygen Plant project. The Global Fund confirmed on the 23rd of August 2022 that the IPIP was approved subject to various conditions, including that the total cost of the PSA Oxygen Plant project does not exceed the amount of 216 million rand. Rizamati was appointed as the professional service provider for the PSA Oxygen Plant project by the IDT. 8 bidders were appointed on the panel for the rollout of the PSA Oxygen Plant at 60 state hospital facilities. The service providers that were appointed on the panel were, however, not required to provide evidence that they meet the SAPRA requirements as set out in the Infrastructure Program Implementation Plan. Therefore, it appears that the IDT appointed 8 service providers on the panel for the rollout of the PSA oxygen plants without confirming that any of the appointed service providers met the required criteria, and that being a SAPRA license was again not included as a mandatory requirement in the RFQ as required by legislation. Dr. Sisi of the IDT reported that there was an inherent requirement that the original equipment manufacturers, or OEMs, are SAPRA registered, and that the bidders were not specifically requested to supply evidence that they are SAPRA registered, as the equipment was going to be procured from the OEMs who are SAPRA registered. Vulking, as one of the preferred service providers, did not have the required authorization to use Atlas Copco's SAPRA license, and the use, therefore, in their submission to the IDT appears to be irregular. In light thereof, and further to the information provided by Dr. Sisi, it appears that the requirement in respect of the SAPRA compliance was an important aspect to the entire procurement process of the rollout of the oxygen plants. This criteria should therefore have been included from the establishment of the panel of service providers, and the entire process therefore appears to be irregular. The PSP pre-tender estimated at tender stage was 216 million rand, and at design stage was 253 million rand, as determined by the service provider. The Department of Health was subsequently requested to approve the increased funding for the rollout and implementation of the plant projects to 592 million rand, more than double what the original starting estimate was. This project was therefore increased by a staggering 174% from the initial estimated budget. This budget, however, was approved by both the Global Fund and the Department of Health. Despite the fact that the issues were raised by the Head of Health, Facilities and Infrastructure Management at the Department of Health, it is determined that the Department of Health DG was of the opinion that the Department of Health could no longer delay the project, as was putting the department at risk of losing the Global Fund resources. The issues that were raised by the Head of Health, Facilities and Infrastructure Management from the Department of Health have, however, been considered, and the reason for putting the department at risk of losing Global Fund money is not sufficient to proceed with the procurement of an irregular supply chain management process. It was also determined that bulking was awarded facilities with a total offer of 428 million rand, which exceeded their CIDB grading threshold of 200 million rand, which means that they did not qualify at all to be awarded that project. The report, however, does not identify any relationship and or links between the appointed contractors and IDT or Department of Health officials. The minutes of meetings, i.e. bid specific committee, bid evaluation committee, management bid adjudication committee, and executive bid adjudication committee is very vague and contains limited information relating to the items that were discussed around these meetings. I find it extraordinary that there was not sufficient minute taking or even electronic recordings of these meetings, despite the investigators repeatedly asking for them. The submission documents that were presented further often contains incorrect and incomplete information, such as the correct dates of when the meetings took place. Record keeping of these minutes are further poor, as none of the recordings for these meetings could be attained, as I'd said earlier. These findings, ladies and gentlemen, represents a monumental failure in governance and adherence to the IDT's policies and National Treasury regulations, undermining the integrity of public procurement and threatening donor funds. The report therefore confirms that multiple companies awarded work under the PSA project did not have valid SAPRA licensing and therefore should never have qualified in the first place. One company, as we have said originally, Bulking Pty Limited, submitted a SAPRA license belonging to Atlas Copco Industrial SA without the knowledge or consent of Atlas Copco. This was clear misrepresentation. In simple language, it's called fraud. Moreover, Bulking intended to subcontract more than 25% of its responsibilities to Brutes Air Solutions, but failed to disclose this in violation of preferential procurement regulations. Secondly, the investigators found that the bid evaluation process was deeply flawed. The SAPRA compliance requirement, originally stipulated in the project execution plan and the Department of Health's Memorandum of Agreement, was deliberately removed from the final request for proposals. This opened the door for ineligible bidders to participate and win massive contracts which they did not qualify for. Meeting minutes were missing or incomplete, which is shocking but not surprising. And committee appointments for these bid adjudication committees were not properly constituted. The people sat on those committees that were not entitled to sit on them. And also bid scores were not properly documented. Price negotiations were not transparent. In one example, as we said, the Department of Health's budget was 216 million rand, but when the IDT issued the RFQ, prices ballooned to over 590 million rand without a single documented approval or value for money assessment being produced. Thirdly, bulking CIDB grading, as we said, is limited to no more than 200 million rand, yet the IDT awarded contracts worth 428 million rand, more than double its allowed threshold. Fourthly, the report found that the CEO of the IDT, Mr. Tebogo Malaka, failed to exercise oversight. The report confirms that she relied entirely on internal SCM staff to assure her that the processes had followed proper procurement protocol. She did not verify any of the documentation. She did not act on any of the red flags raised by the Department of Health. She did not convene the necessary risk committees to assess the matter. In this, she was not alone. The report also singles out Mr. or Dr. Sisi, the General Manager for Supply Chain Management at the IDT, for his role in misleading internal stakeholders and failing to act in accordance with his responsibilities. Dr. Sisi advised against cancelling the RFQ process despite clear warnings from the Department of Health. He assured the CEO and evaluation committees that the procurement process was compliant, when in fact key regulatory requirements such as valid SAPRA licenses had not been enforced. Instead, both the CEO and Dr. Sisi approved contracts and accepted flawed internal assurances. It is important to note that no global fund resources were distributed for this project. That is why we were entirely justified to act when we did, to safeguard donor funding, which means that the entire allocation will be spent but through the DBSA to procure those oxygen systems. So I'm very glad that we did act when we did, or if that donor funding had been spent, I think that they may have pulled the entire project. I would like to share now some recommendations, but before so, I want to say that this report does not only identify failings, it also makes clear that important recommendations of the department for the department and our entities need to be enacted, like taking appropriate action against the relevant officials who are involved in the PSA Oxygen Plant project, as far as they have not addressed the issues that were raised by the Department of Health adequately during the procurement process. This will include, but not limited to, the following: Ms. Malaka, as the CEO, for confirming the procurement process followed in the RFQ was correct, whereas there were irregularities identified, and for the appointment of Department of Health officials as members and not observers of bid committees, as prescribed by the Memorandum of Understanding. Ms. Malaka for not ensuring the proper establishment, composition and functioning of these bid specification committees and bid evaluation committees, as stipulated in paragraph 8.1 of the National Treasury's PFMA Supply Chain Management Instruction Note number 3, 2021 and 2022, titled Enhancing Compliance, Transparency and Accountability in SCM by appointing officials as members and not as observers to the respective committees as prescribed by the MOA. Ms. Malaka, together with Dr. Sisi, did not handle the issues identified and raised relating to the procurement process followed in a fair, transparent and equitable manner as provided for in the IDT's Supply Chain Management Policy, paragraph 39.1.1 and section 2171 of the Constitution. Dr. Sisi, as the SCM General Manager for his role in the procurement processes followed by the IDT for the RFQ processes, and not considering the cancellation of the RFQ as suggested by the Head of Health Facilities from the Department of Health, in line with the requirements of the IPIP, paragraph 3.1 and 3.5, or lack thereof. Mr. Motsatsi, in his capacity as the BEC Secretariat, for failing to maintain accurate records of the relevant relevant minutes of meetings and the electronic records of the BEC proceedings in line with the IDT's Code of Ethics and Business Conduct Policy. All BEC members, as prescribed by the National Treasury Supply Chain Management Instruction Note number 3 of 2016-17 on preventing and combating abuse in the supply chain management system, paragraph 10, which stipulated, and I quote, that every member of the bid committee is jointly and severally liable for the improper evaluation and adjudication of this bid. Provide adequate training to members that are involved in the supply chain management process, including the BSc, BEC, and BAC, relating to the procedures that should be followed as part of the evaluation of bids. This will include the evaluation of the bids to ensure that they evaluate the tenders with the appropriate CIDB grading threshold as part of the adjudication process, and implementing procedures to ensure that proper minutes of meetings are kept by the IDT and that the recordings and records of these meetings are available should they be required. This is not an award that took place 5 or 10 years ago. It took place 18 months ago. Those records should have been made available and they should have been kept. The forensic report recommends disciplinary action should be taken against Ms. Malaka and Dr. Sisi, which will be in the purview of the IDT Board. The investigation further recommends disciplinary referrals against several other IDT executives and SCM officials. Ladies and gentlemen, this morning I've taken the following actions to ensure consequence management and accountability, and this will include writing to the Hawks and provide them with a report to supplement their current criminal investigation into this matter. Like our handling of the George report, I want to ensure that where criminal allegations exist, I want to ensure the highest chances of success. I've also briefed the Minister of Health this afternoon, who has been incredibly supportive during this time, and I wish to extend my gratitude to him for his collaboration and guidance. And I have formally briefed the newly constituted IDT Board this afternoon on the contents of this report at a meeting held earlier in Pretoria. Accountability must follow, and it will follow. South Africans deserve to know how their money is spent and how it is misused. I'm confident that the Board will consider the report's recommendations and other related matters in due course. We are not just reacting to a scandal. We're using it as an opportunity to get things right in our entities and our department. Public works and infrastructure has immense potential to be a force for good in South Africa. It can generate income for the state to be used in social infrastructure. It can save the country billions of rands in leased accommodation for departments, and its assets can be used for public good. That's why we must use every opportunity to better our systems and to build towards this goal to which I am so deeply committed to. Let me also speak briefly about the future of the IDT. In July 2025, Cabinet appointed a full-term board to the IDT. I'm grateful that Cabinet has endorsed this board and placed its faith in them to continue with turning around the entity. That board took office on the 5th of July, ending more than a year of instability. The new board includes the appointment of Mrs. Zimbini Hill as the chairperson and Professor Raymond Nkado as the deputy chairperson. I want to thank them both and the other trustees for accepting this responsibility at such a critical juncture. Mrs. Hill, like myself, has had to endure the most horrific, sexist and racist attacks against her, often supported by political parties, for doing a job our country has called on her to do. She has not relented once, but has bravely stood up to these bullies head on. I expect this from each member of the board, and I know that they will rise to the challenge and systematically deal with each matter raised in the report, including implementing every single recommendation of this report, instituting consequence management, restoring governance and compliance frameworks, rebuilding the reputation of the IDT to be a trusted partner in social infrastructure delivery. And they must urgently conclude the separate investigation into the IDT's office lease, which remains unresolved. Let me say this to the public. The IDT can be salvaged. I'm fully committed to doing so, which is why I've put so much effort into getting us to this point. I was not prepared to accept the chaos and dysfunction so that people could steal as they pleased. It has a critical role to play in delivering clinics, schools, and police stations, but only if it is trusted, and only if it is clean, and only if it is led with courage and competence. As I conclude, I want to reaffirm something fundamental. This is not just about a tender. It's not just about one company, and it's not just about the IDT. This is about the kind of state that we are building. And today gives expression to priority 3 of the medium-term development plan, which is to build a capable, ethical, and developmental state. Anyone who opposes what we are doing here today, in fact, opposes this very principle. I will soon hand over will make available alongside with myself, the DG and the DDG to answer questions and to further unpack any questions that you may have. In closing, let me say this. If we tolerate corruption or maladministration, we betray the very people who we are entrusted to serve, and that is you, the public. If we look the other way when procurement is manipulated, we erode public trust. And if we fail to act when evidence of wrongdoing is placed before us, we are ourselves complicit. That is why we acted, that's why we investigated, and that's why today we will move to the next step, which is consequence management. I again want to thank the Department of Health for its cooperation in this investigation. I want to thank those officials and whistleblowers who had the courage to speak out. I also want to thank some journalists that are here today who had the courage to write about what they saw. Despite being threatened and harassed, despite having fake WhatsApps made in their names, I pay tribute to you as well. And I want to thank the people of South Africa for demanding better of us. This is not the end of our cleanup, but it is one part of a difficult but necessary process that we are committed to and we will complete. Thank you.